How's it going, good people? This will be the behind the scenes video of the software for the 2023 Christmas light show that I did at my house. Each year I do a Christmas light show and I go behind the scenes to show you all of the architecture that is behind the making the show work. This year's show is significantly different than the 2022 show. So if you go and watch the 2022 video and then come and watch the 2023 video, you'll see that there are a lot of differences. I did a separate video for the hardware. If you check the channel's content, you'll see that video. And the reason I split them up is because there's a lot of stuff to cover in both the software and hardware. So I did two separate videos accordingly. My name is Kenny. This is Tech Talk with RHT Services, and let's go ahead and get started with discussing the behind the scenes of the 2023 Christmas Light Show. Now, for starters, I use Falcon Pi Player to run the show. I have in here, if I go here, so I have playlists, and I actually created 3 different playlists. If you're familiar with Remote Falcon, I pretty much created my own implementation of Remote Falcon with some additional features. But I set mine up a little bit differently. So if we come over to the scheduler, so I have those 3 schedules here. And what it does is, depending on the day of the week, like the odd days get the Christmas 2 playlist, the even days get the Christmas 3 playlist, and then other days get a combination of Christmas or 2 or 3. And those playlists play. Now, what does that playlist look like? So we'll come over to the Christmas playlist, and I have 4 songs in here, 2 of which are the PSA. And so the way this works is it does the lead in, which sets the volume, and then we have the PSA, a song, the PSA, and then another song, and it repeats this infinitely. The way what I call the Light Show Extender, which is a custom C# application that I created, the way it works is that it will, let's see, I think I need to pull up this file here. All right, so it is a C# application, and if you want to, you can go to the GitHub repository, github.com/almostengr/lightshowextender, and you'll be able to access the source code here for that. But the way this works is it checks the status of Falcon Pi Player, so there's no toggling on or off. It's like always checking Falcon Player status via the API, and once it sees that a song is playing, it will do some comparisons. If the song that's currently playing is not the same as the previous song, then it will update that song and push that information to the website. Now, the website that I have, I'm using a subdomain on my personal blog for this purpose. Granted, this could be any domain. But behind the scenes here, there are 2 API files. There's an API for the web page, which is called via JavaScript. And so JavaScript makes an API call to the web page API on the website, gets the song information, and then displays it here. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and get this playing so you can see what this form actually looks like. So we'll put this on repeat and go ahead and hit play on that. Okay. All right, so in a moment here, this will refresh as the Light Show Extender will then start monitoring it. It's kind of got like a deep sleep mode, and then once it kicks in, it starts monitoring more actively. Not sure why it shut off like that. That's weird. Okay, there we go. Show information. All right, so so as it goes through each of the songs, you'll see the title information here change. In addition to, it gets the weather information from the National Weather Service. So you can see right now it is currently 46 degrees or 8 degrees Celsius, and there is no wind chill. However, if there was a wind chill, it would show that here with the degrees accordingly, Fahrenheit and Celsius. And then we have the CPU temperature. Now this CPU temperature is from the Falcon Player. So you see here it says 91.76. That says 94. Now this CPU temperature does fluctuate fairly regularly. Yeah, so it does fluctuate. And so at the time that the CPU temperature was captured, this is what it is, but it can and will change as the outdoor temperature change, in addition to the amount of computing that the Raspberry Pi is having to do will also change as well. So with that and there's a little bit of a glitch here. I'm not sure. There we go. So it's more in line now. It's having some connectivity issues, which I'm not fully sure why. All right, and so also I have the radio frequency. I broadcast mine on 90.3, so I put that here, and then we have some information about the show down here at the bottom. Now, going back to the Falcon Player, and behind the scenes, the C# application is a .NET worker application, meaning it has no API. It does have a configuration file, which if I come over to the file manager, and I'm not sure why it's being as slow as it's being, but if I come over to the file manager, you will see sometime today that it has a configuration file here that is used to load that data. But the way, going back to the worker service and how it works, so you get so you check the status of the Falcon Player, you make sure something gets received. Then you do show startup or shutdown if we are in a startup or shutdown scenario. If the current song is blank, then we clear out the current song information on the website. Now the website does have an API, and that data that's received to that API is then stored into a database. I use MySQL for the website, but you could easily adapt this to Postgres or any other database type system for your particular production website. All right, so we'll do uploads. I think it's where it is. Not sure. Okay. So coming back here, and so it checks to see how many songs, gets the song information in addition to how many songs have been played since the last tweet. Now, right now, the Twitter functionality is not working because of the changes that were made to the API, and I did not have an opportunity to integrate those changes into this application, but I did at least set that type of configuration up here, and so that information in a future release will be able to be displayed on an appropriate Twitter account. Let's see, we're also checking for the PSA. So the way I have this set up is to check to see how many songs have played since the last PSA. A feature in Remote Falcon is that you can specify how many songs are required to, what's the maximum number of songs in between each PSA. And so this is a configurable value from the, right now it's set into, I believe, in the app settings or in the configuration. Yeah, it's in the configuration right there. That checks the configuration. And so right now, this year's show, I had it set to 2 songs in between each PSA, but you can set it to more or less. Next, we'll get the next song in the queue. So if the queue is empty, it continues playing with the playlist. However, I do intend on changing that. I wanted to actually use a random song going forward. And so I will be making changes to the code so that if there's no songs in the queue, that it picks a song at random. And that way it's not playing the same 2 songs over and over again every night. However, there may be some opposition and some other considerations to that, but that's at least the plan at this point. Once it gets the song information, if there is a song there, it will then use that to be inserted into the queue via the Falcon Player API. And I don't want to go into too technical detail with that, but there is a command that you can send commands to Falcon Pi Player via the API to make it do things. So what happens is, so if I come here and let's see, let me pick a long song. So Shaft, and I know the code for this year's show is Popcorn. Each year I'll change it. All right, that song has already been requested. Okay, that's not correct. Should not have been. Okay, there we go. All right, so there's one song ahead of my request. I'm not sure why there's a song ahead of the request. But yeah, so this is running, and once that song comes up, you'll see it show up here. But it gets stored into a database table, and then the queue is retrieved as appropriately needed. All right, so here's the configuration file. I don't want to show it because it actually has actual API keys in it. But the way that works is, and I think I have an example file here. So we have the logging level, which is the default app settings, when you create an app settings file or you create a project in C#, you get the logging stuff here. I've changed it all to warnings because the info messages are not necessarily needed in a production setup. And then we have, at some point, I will want to integrate this with Home Assistant. Right now, I don't have it doing that, but it will be at some point. This application also reaches out to the National Weather Service API, and you give it an API URL, which is the URL to the National Weather Service that you want to call, the station ID, and then the user agent. The user agent, because the National Weather Service does not use API keys, they utilize the user agent to uniquely identify each request. In their documentation, they state that you should be sending your email address or an email address that you have access to as part of this user agent request. However, if you use a browser user agent, it will still work, even, they say to use the API with the email. All right, website options. So this is the configuration values for the URL and the API key to point to my website. And the way that works, you come here, there's another file that has a API key here, and then it points to a URL. So whatever URL / I believe it's Jukebox API is the route that it points to, because there's 2 API pages. And then there is the generic app settings. So the maximum number of songs between the PSA is 2. Now I did, as the show went running this year, notice that there is a bug. And so in certain situations, you can actually get 2 PSAs to play back to back. I'm going to see how I can try to figure out how to not let that happen going forward in the future, but I'm not 100% sure about that. And then also startup sequence and shutdown sequence. So if you have a startup sequence that runs prior to, this can be put in there to know to run certain things. Likewise for the shutdown, the exterior lighting entity. So the intent with this is that this actually belongs to the Home Assistant. So if you have, let's say, lights that you turn on at night, like I do, the exterior light entity name will be placed here. And then based upon that name, when the show starts, the application will make an API call to your Home Assistant instance using the API URL and the API key for Home Assistant to turn those lights off. Likewise, the Falcon Player has an API URL and then the max temperature in degrees Celsius. The intent behind this is that I previously had it where this would monitor the CPU temperature of the Falcon Player or the Raspberry Pi that you're using Falcon Player on, and if it exceeded the specified number that you put in, that you would get a Twitter notification or mention about, hey, something's going on, you may want to check it. This is indicative of, well, maybe it's too hot, and if it's too hot, it possibly could be a fire. And I say that because some people do have pixels that they run, and those pixels on occasion have caught fire. Not saying that your Raspberry Pi would ever catch fire, but there is a chance that you may have pixels near the Raspberry Pi, and if you do, that fire from the pixel could land on your control box and thus set your Raspberry Pi on fire, and thus you will want to have those type of notifications. I do have some other things that I want to implement going forward in the upcoming year, and I've added those as issues. Some of these are based upon the things that I've gotten as suggestions based upon doing lives and sharing the specifics of the light show with the people on the live, and they were like, hey, you should add this. One example of that is the current transformer. Someone made a suggestion that if it would be awesome to see how much electricity the light show uses, ideally in real time, but if not in real time, just period. That said, a current transformer idea was thrown out there, and I have considered it. The other alternative to it, and I've actually tested this out, is to use the song information, the X-Light sequence file, to be able to determine the amount of power being drawn based upon the number of lights on each channel and so forth. And utilizing ChatGPT, I was able to come up with something that is feasible with that. So I got to actually implement that at a later point in time. One other thing that I personally noticed is to be able to detect the lights that may have failed. I had a string of lights, and mind you, I use all AC lights. I had a string of lights that, for some reason, I think the connection just got loose at one point. I didn't know that it happened. However, I figured the system should be able to figure out that, hey, something's wrong. whatever it is, and that it's able to diagnose itself. Similar to how a car is monitoring the systems, and if the values get out of a certain range, or if the values are not what it's expecting that they should be, then you get a check engine light. Likewise, I figured, well, if I can run a test sequence, calculate the amount of voltage that test sequence should pull, or amperage, excuse me, not voltage, amperage. Then using the current transformer, read that value, and if that value is lower than what is expected, then you throw essentially a check lights light, if that makes sense. And thus, that will show up ideally here on the dashboard here, and that could be utilized accordingly. All right, so apparently there are a number of other songs that are in the queue that, because this should not, I only selected one, and obviously there's a bunch of other stuff sitting in the queue there. So yeah, let me go ahead and stop that while it's running. Where's the stop? There we go, stop now. All right, so that'll eventually reset and go back to show offline. Now, I have all AC lights, and you probably see these two tabs here with WLED. The WLED, two instances that I have, one of them controls the tree, as you see, WLED tree, and then the other, I have spotlights in the yard or floodlights in the yard, and the WLED instance controls those as well. Those two things tie back in here to the Falcon Player. If I go to the multi-sync, it should show, okay, it doesn't show those. But normally you would go here and you would see the other two systems tied in to that, and they would show here. That being said, though, there is a way to configure WLED to run and control relays without installing the user mod or the user relay mod, I guess, or plugin. And so I was able to figure that out. I have a separate video that discusses how to do that. If you go check the behind the scenes playlist, that will be a link to that down below. You'll see all of those things there. And one of the videos is how to control AC lights with WLED. So be sure to check that out if you are interested in that. The reason I chose to do that is I previously did have a Raspberry Pi. However, during the shortage of COVID, the Raspberry Pis not only got very expensive due to a lot of shortages, but then also I don't want to have a bunch of Raspberry Pis out there when I can get away with a small $5 to $10 ESP32 that can practically do the same thing that I need to do, which is basically control the lights, turn them on and off accordingly. So that's where the WLED instances come into play. That being said, this is, let's see, and I also have put in the repository with here the documentation. The C# application that I created runs as a system service. What does that mean? For those of you that are not familiar with Linux, system services are basically like background applications. In Windows, they call them Windows services, but in Linux, they're system service. This application is set up like that, and that way every time you turn it on, the application always starts. And there's a daemon that monitors that system service once you configure it. And anytime, let's say, that application were to crash, that daemon would reload the application, and it also provides logging here, as you see here. So it's very useful in that regard to use it as a system service. And then also I have another document for the JSON file. I do believe this documentation does need to be updated to reflect the latest version, but all of that information is contained within the repository. We also have some scripts over here. These scripts can be called by or from Falcon Player to restart and stop the light show extender application accordingly. I do not have steps in here currently on how to set this up, but I will be doing that at some point. As far as the website go, now I've set this up for my specific website. However, if you were to clone this repository and do this for your light show, you will really need to change the example configuration file as well as the mkdocs configuration file to be able to rebuild the site with the values that you have for your particular light show. Each song that is listed in the drop-down list is an entry here in the list of sequences in the mkdocs configuration. in addition to the links for the various pages on the website and the links in the footer are all configurable. That way you do not have to modify the template with those values, that those are there. One last thing, I do have the station frequency here, and then to make sure that the PHP pages, the API as well as the Jukebox API do get deployed, they are configured to be static templates within the MKDocs configuration. Lastly, if you want to have or use this code, like I said, you can go to my GitHub repository and copy it as is. I do not currently have it set up where it is building the actual C# application as part of the deployment, but you can set up the .NET environment on your computer and go from there. As always, there are releases to this, so when I do a group of features or fix a significant number of things, I will create a release and you can track those releases accordingly. That being said, that covers everything for the behind the scenes of the software of my 2023 Christmas light show. If you have any comments or questions, as always, please drop those down below. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and follow. That lets me know that more people are interested in this content, and it also helps get this content out to other people. I thank you for watching and check you out in the next video.